On a violent storm night in a quiet African village, a wealthy woman stood trembling at the edge of a raging river with a small boy in her arms. The wind howled through the trees. Rain struck the water so hard the surface looked like boiling metal. Across the riverbank, something began to rise slowly. Years earlier, the woman had come to this same river, barefoot, hungry, and desperate. She had begged the water to change her life. The river listened. It gave her everything she asked for: wealth, power, respect. But the river never gives gifts, only bargains. And tonight, the river had come to collect its payment. To understand how she arrived at this moment, we must return to the days when she was. The village of Ilu-Ayo rested between a thick forest and a wide brown river that moved slowly through the land. Life in Ilu-Ayo followed the rhythm of survival. Farmers woke before sunrise. Women carried baskets of vegetables to the market square. Children chased goats through dusty paths, while elders sat beneath the iroko tree discussing village matters. Everyone struggled, but some struggled more than others. Among them was a girl named Abeni. Her hut leaned sideways near the forest path, patched together with palm leaves and torn cloth that barely kept rain outside. She had no family left. Her mother died from a fever when Abeni was still young. Her father followed not long after, leaving nothing behind except unpaid debts and a broken home. At first, the neighbors helped her. They gave her food. Sometimes they let her sleep in their homes during heavy rains. But kindness fades quickly when life is already hard for everyone. Soon, Abeni was left to survive alone. Every morning, before the sun climbed high, she roasted cassava beside the road leading toward the market town. Travelers sometimes stopped to buy, but on many days they walked past without even looking at her. By evening, Abeni often returned home with most of the cassavas still in her basket, and on nights when hunger gnawed at her stomach like an animal, she would walk toward the river outside the village. The elders warned people about that river. They said spirits lived beneath the water, old spirits that listened carefully when humans spoke careless words. But poverty makes people fearless. She doesn't care of whatever will happen. One evening, Abeni sat beside the river watching the slow current move beneath the fading light. Her basket still held most of the cassava she had tried to sell that day. Her stomach hurt from hunger. Her patience with life had finally snapped. She picked up a piece of cassava and threw it into the water. "If there are truly spirits here," she muttered bitterly, "then you must enjoy watching people suffer." The river moved. At first, she thought it was the wind disturbing the surface, but then the water began turning in a slow circle. Abeni stood quickly. Something was rising. She was scared. She picked her basket quickly. She can't afford to leave it behind. A tall shape formed from mist and dark water. It stood calmly where no human could stand. The figure studied her. "Stop. You speak boldly for someone who has nothing." Abeni's heart pounded violently. "What are you?" The figure's voice sounded calm, ancient. "I am a messenger of the river. And you are someone who want wealth."
The spirit watched her closely. "I can give you wealth," it said. "More wealth than anyone in this village has ever known."
The word wealth felt dangerous in her mind. She imagined full plates of food, strong houses, comfortable rooms, beautiful clothes, and ileke. Having maids at her beck and call, a life where no one would pity her, rather she was the one helping. "What would I have to do?" she asked quietly. The spirit smiled.
"Once every year, when the river calls, you must return something precious."
Abeni frowned. What kind of thing? The spirit's glowing eyes met hers.
Something you love.
The night wind rustled the tall grass along the riverbank. Abeni hesitated, but then she remembered the empty hut waiting for her, the hunger, the endless struggle, the life of penury she has been living. Finally, she nodded. I accept. The spirit's smile widened, and somewhere, deep beneath the river, something ancient stirred. The change began slowly. The next morning, a trader caravan stopped by her roadside stall. The traders bought every cassava she had. She got more and still sold all for the day. This must be the new beginning for me, she said. 2 days later, he returned and asked if she could supply more. Within weeks, Abeni was buying cassava from farmers and selling it to traders heading toward distant markets. Soon she moved from cassava into palm oil trading, then dried fish, then yams. Money began flowing into her life faster than she had ever imagined. She built a larger stall in the market, then several more. Soon she had workers selling goods for her while she handled trade negotiations. Within 2 years, Abeni owned farmland along the riverbanks. Within 3 years, she had storage barns filled with goods. Caravans began stopping in Iloilo specifically to trade with her. The girl who once begged customers to stop at her stall now had merchants waiting hours to meet her. Then she built a house, a real house, large carved doors, wide windows, a courtyard filled with workers moving baskets of goods. People began greeting her differently. They bowed slightly when she passed. They called her Madam Abeni. They called her blessed. But every year, the river called. The first sacrifice. The first time the river called again, Abeni returned reluctantly. The spirit rose from the water. It is time. Fear settled in her chest. What must I give? The spirit asked calmly.
What do you love most right now?
Abeni thought of her small goat. The animal has been the only thing her parent gave her, which she holds dear. The animal had followed her everywhere during her poorest years. Everyone knows how much she cares for the goat. My goat, she said quietly. The spirit nodded.
Bring it.
The next morning, villagers found the goat lying lifeless beside the riverbank. They said the animal must have wandered too close to the water. Abeni said nothing. She mourned the loss of her goat. But that night she stared at the ceiling of her new home and realized something chilling. The bargain was real. The next year the river called again. By then, Abeni's trading empire had expanded into 3 neighboring towns. She owned boats transporting goods along the river. She had hired guards to protect her caravans. The spirit rose once more from the water.
What do you love most this year?
Abeni hesitated longer this time. Finally, she whispered the name of her closest childhood friend, Sade, the woman who had helped her during her poorest days. 3 weeks later, Sade drowned while washing clothes at the river. Abeni wept harder than she had in years, but she still returned to her life of wealth, and the years continued. A loyal servant died suddenly. A trusted business partner vanished during a trade journey. Each year the river returned. Each year the cost grew heavier. Yet Abeni kept accepting the bargain, because the wealth never stopped growing. Until the year, everything changed. Abeni married a traveling merchant who admired her intelligence and ambition. Their union strengthened her trading empire even further. Months later, she discovered she was pregnant. For the first time in many years, something inside her softened. During the months of pregnancy, she reduced her travels. she spent more time inside her compound preparing for the child's arrival. Yet, in the quiet moments, when night fell and the wind carried the smell of the river into the house, Abeni sometimes felt the old unease return. She had not visited the river in months. She was tired of the voice, tired of the bargains, and now that she was pregnant, she wanted peace more than anything. That evening, Akanmu sat beside her on the veranda, carving a small wooden toy. His large hands worked carefully, shaping the wood into the rough figure of a horse. "For the child," he said with a smile. Abeni laughed softly. "You don't even know if it's a boy." "Then it will be a horse for a strong daughter," he replied. The lantern between them flickered as the night wind passed through the compound. For a moment, Abeni allowed herself to imagine a future untouched by the river. A house filled with children, her businesses growing, a husband who loved her without suspicion or fear. Akanmu placed the small carving in her palm. "Whatever this child becomes," he said, "promise me one thing." "What?" "That he will grow up knowing his mother built everything with courage." Abeni looked down at the toy in her hand. Courage. If only he knew. Before she could answer, the wind shifted. The familiar sound reached her ears. Water. Not the distant sound of the river flowing naturally. A different sound. The slow, calling ripple she had heard so many times before. Her heart tightened. The river had returned. That night, she left the house quietly while Akanmu slept. The moon hung low above the trees as she walked the narrow path toward the riverbank. Crickets filled the air with restless music. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the water's edge, the surface was already moving, waiting.
"You stayed away too long,"
the river whispered. Abeni wrapped her arms around herself. "I am carrying a child," she said quietly. "Let me rest."
"The blessings have continued."
Her throat tightened. "Yes."
"And so the balance must continue."
Fear crept slowly into her chest. "What do you want?" For a moment, the river was silent. Then the answer came.
"Your husband."
The words struck like thunder. Abeni stepped back. "No!"
"The next sacrifice must be greater than the last."
"Take something else," she pleaded. "Take gold, take land, take the trading caravans." "The river has no use for those." Abeni's voice trembled. "Then take me." The water darkened slightly.
"You are already bound to this bargain."
Tears burned her eyes. "Akanmu is innocent."
"So were the others."
She shook her head violently. "I will not do it." The river's surface began to churn slowly.
"You will lose far more if the balance breaks."
Her heart pounded. "What does that mean?" But the river did not answer. The water slowly calmed. The voice faded, leaving only one final whisper drifting through the air. The river always collects what it is owed. The next morning began like any other. Akanmu prepared to travel to a nearby town to inspect new stalls Abeni had purchased. He kissed her forehead before leaving. "Rest today," he told her gently. "You worry too much." Abeni forced a smile. "Come back before nightfall." "Of course." She watched his cart disappear down the dusty road. Something in her chest felt wrong. All day the sky remained strangely heavy, though no storm clouds gathered. By evening, the traders returned, but Akanmu did not. At first, Abeni told herself he had been delayed. Then the sun set. Still no sign of him. As darkness spread across the land, a group of fishermen arrived at her compound. Their faces were pale. One of them stepped forward slowly. "Madam, we found your husband near the river crossing." Abeni's breath stopped. "What happened?" "He fell into the water." The words felt unreal. "A Kanmu could swim," she said. The fishermen exchanged uneasy glances. "That is what we thought too." They brought his body wrapped in cloth. His face was peaceful, too peaceful, as if he had simply closed his eyes and surrendered. Abeni collapsed beside him, her cries tearing through the night. But beneath her grief, another truth burned quietly inside her. The river had not waited for her permission. Late that night, after everyone had left and the compound had fallen silent, Abeni stood alone on the veranda. The river shimmered faintly in the distance under the moonlight. She understood now. The river had not asked for a Kanmu. It had only warned her. The bargain she made years ago had grown larger than her choices, and the river was no longer waiting for her to agree. The morning after a Kanmu was buried, Abeni's compound was quieter than it had ever been. No traders shouted at the gate, no carts rattled across the courtyard. Even the servants moved softly, as if loud footsteps might shatter something fragile in the air. For the first time in years, the house that wealth had built felt empty. Abeni sat alone beneath the veranda roof, staring at the road where a Kanmu's body had been carried home the day before. The memory of the white cloth around him would not leave her mind. Her hand rested on her stomach. The child inside her moved gently. It should have been a comforting feeling. Instead, it filled her with fear. She knew now that the river was no longer asking for small things. The sacrifices had grown, and she could not bear to imagine what the spirit might demand next. She mourned a Kanmu and promised to protect anyone closer to her when the river bargains again. Few weeks after, labor began. Heavy rain fell across the village. Women gathered in her room, whispering encouragement as she cried out through waves of pain. Hours passed. Then, finally, the cry of a newborn filled the house. A boy. She named him Adesina. The moment she held him in her arms, Abeni felt something stronger than ambition, stronger than fear. Love. Adesina grew into a lively child. He followed his mother everywhere through the compound. Servants laughed as he ran between baskets of goods in the courtyard. He loved listening to traders tell stories about distant lands. At night, Abeni often sat beside his bed, watching him sleep. For the first time since the river bargain, she felt truly happy. She even convinced herself the river might stop calling after her husband's demise. But ancient bargains do not fade so easily. The year Adesina turned 4, the river called again. Thunder rolled across the sky as Abeni walked toward the river holding her son. The spirit rose slowly from the water.
You remember our agreement.
Her voice shook. There must be another way. The spirit's eyes glowed coldly.
Wealth always has a price.
Abeni clutched the child tightly. I will not give him to you. The spirit studied her.
You made the promise willingly.
Abeni stepped backward. Take the wealth instead. Lightning flashed across the sky. The spirit watched her carefully.
You would surrender everything?
Abeni nodded. Everything. The storm raged all night. By morning, everything had changed. Chaos had already begun. One of her largest storehouses had collapsed. Palm oil barrels rolled across the ground while workers shouted in confusion. What happened? She demanded. A foreman ran toward her, breathless. Madam, the beams snapped without warning. Another worker pointed toward the fields. Your cocoa farm is flooding. More voices rose from the road. The trading caravan overturned near the bridge. Abeni stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard as disaster unfolded around her. Within a single hour, everything began falling apart. Farms ruined, goods destroyed, business partners sending messengers with bad news. It was as if the fortune she had spent years building had suddenly begun unraveling thread by thread. Abeni slowly turned back toward the direction of the river. The spirit's words echoed in her mind. "You believe those things are the real gifts?" Her stomach tightened. That night, as she lay awake listening to the distant roar of the river, a terrible realization crept into her thoughts. She had begged the river to take back the wells, and the river had begun doing exactly that. But the river had never promised how much it would take. Trade partners abandoned their agreements. Within weeks, her wealth collapsed completely. The grand house emptied. Workers left. The richest woman in Iluio became poor once again. But her son lived, and she believed she had defeated the river. As Adesina grew older, something troubled Abeni. The boy struggled to walk. His legs remained weak. Sometimes he dragged one foot behind him while moving. Other children ran freely through the village fields, while Adesina struggled to keep up. Villagers whispered. Some blamed illness, others said it was fate, but Abeni understood the truth. She returned one evening to the river. "You still took your payment," she whispered. The water moved slightly, and in that moment she understood. She had refused to give the river her son, so the river had begun doing exactly that. Years later, the elders of Iluio told this story beside evening fires. They spoke of the girl who rose from poverty to unimaginable wealth, and of the river that never gives anything freely. They ended with the same warning. Quick wealth always hides a question, and the river always collects its answer. Then they would glance toward the dark river in the distance, because some spirits are always listening, waiting for the next desperate voice, willing to make a bargain. Now, tell me something honestly. If the river appeared to you tonight and offered to make you rich, but asked for something you loved every year, would you accept the bargain or walk away? Let me know in the comments, and remember, some rivers are always listening.